Hello everyone, I hope you can see that. We're going to talk about growing vegetables in small spaces. Many of you may not have a garden space in which you can plant outside, or you may have that but also want the flexibility, sorry this is whizzing on, of being able to plant in smaller spaces. As you can see, some of the pots here, pots on window ledges, using old boxes. You can use lots of different containers and grow all sorts of crops. So there's going to be a lot of detail on this session, but I know that Lorna's also going to be linking you later on to some more live planting sessions, so you can see a bit more detail as well. But I've picked out a few crops that are good to grow in containers, which are easy and shouldn't provide too many problems. So what can we do? Well, some of the crops that we grow need a little bit of warmth to get going. In other words, the seeds need to be started off indoors, maybe indoors on a window ledge, somewhere sunny. So some of the examples of crops that you can start off inside are dwarf French beans, courgettes, small pumpkins, and we'll go on to how we actually do this. Some of the lettuces, and also something you can start off inside are potatoes. And this means we can get a plant which is a reasonable size by the time we're able to plant it outside in a bigger pot when the threat of frosts is gone. So what do you need to grow inside? Well, you're going to need some small pots, and maybe you've got some old plug plant containers from last year when you had bedding or you had different things. But what you need to do, whatever you use, is to give it a good wash and make sure that they're clean, because if there's any old soil, it may contain bacteria or bugs that we really don't want in our new crops. So have a good wash of all the containers. Small pots, you can use old yogurt pots. As long as things have got holes in so they can drain, then they're really useful to use. But you will need a good quality seed sowing compost. And the difference between that and a multi-purpose, which you've probably heard of, is that seed sowing doesn't have lots of nutrients, because seeds don't need nutrients or feed when they're starting off. It also tends to have more drainage material because seeds don't want to rot off either. So the best thing is if you can get some seed sowing compost. If you can't, if you mix a bit of sand into multi-purpose or your own compost. But there's always the risk using your own compost that there might be some bacteria or some bugs in it. So that's why if you could spend the money on good seed sowing compost, that's great. And it'll tell you it on the outside of the bag. Whatever you use, bring it indoors so that it's not as cold as it is outside. I mean, in fact, we've had warm weather, but it can be cold. So bring it indoors the day before, a couple of days before you start using it, and it'll get up to the room temperature, and therefore seeds, which usually want a bit of warmth, will be able to go ahead and germinate and grow. Something to fill your containers, spoons, whatever you've got. Maybe you'll just use your hands, but spoons are useful as well. And then we need to get something to put our pots or our plug plant containers onto. And old clean plastic trays, you know, the ones you get food in, washed out, ones without holes, obviously. You can use those, especially the bigger ones, to put your pots on, to then put on your windowsill and not have any spills of water as you have to water them in the days ahead. Another thing which really helps, particularly some seeds, is if we can cover the container that they're in, again with a plastic container, if you can get one. This time it doesn't matter if they've got holes in, because you're going to upend them and put them over the top, and this keeps the moisture in and any warmth as well. Plastic bags can always be used as well, and I'll talk about that in a minute. And then of course we do need labels and a permanent marker to mark down the name of the crop that you're growing, carrots with their name, for example, and the date that you sowed them. So you can work out as the days go on, how long it's been, how long it's taken them to germinate, and so on. Labels, you can get labels, you can buy labels, you can buy wood, you can buy plastic, which you can reuse, or you can just use ice lolly sticks as well. So there are ways of doing it so that you're not spending too much money. Some things are the same for whatever crop you're going to grow. So read what the information says on the back of the seed packets. It's really important that you have a look and see, because it gives you dates to sow, dates to plant outdoors, and hopefully if it's a really well-written information sheet, it'll tell you how long things take to germinate, what you should do with them afterwards, and so on. So there's lots of information, and it's always important to read it, as well as obviously looking up more information in books or online. Now, we've talked a little about growing things on a window ledge to start them off. But before you then take them outside and plant them into the bigger containers, you need to harden off the plants. And hardening off means getting them used to the outdoor temperature, which of course is going to be different from the nice protected indoor temperature that you've grown your seeds and plants in. So one way of doing that is just to take the trays you've got or the plants you've got and put them outside in a sunny, sheltered spot just during the day while they get used to the temperature being slightly lower than it is indoors. And then you can bring them inside at night so that they don't suffer from immediately having very low temperatures. And this hardens the plant off so it's not so soft. So when you finally put it out, it's going to withstand different temperatures. When we do plant plants out, whatever plant they are, from the inside to the outside, if there's a chance of frost, and we never know when there's a late frost, you could have ready to hand, if you look at the weather forecast and it says temperature is going to really drop at night, have some fleece, horticultural fleece, which you can buy, or some material, old net curtain, Hessian bags, just something you can cover over the plants in case of frost, and just take it off again during the day. So that's quite important. We don't want to be caught out by late frost. As I said before, the planting compost now for planting outside into larger containers should be a good quality multi-purpose compost, which will contain a little bit of fertilizer, which will carry you through plant feed for the first 6 weeks or so. After that, you'll need to feed yourself. But also, we don't have to start everything indoors. Once the threat of frost is over, so we're talking about May time, it'll vary depending on what area of Scotland you're in. You can, instead of starting the seeds off inside, start them off outside. It means it'll take slightly longer before they produce fruit or vegetables for you to harvest. But sometimes we run out of time, and then you can wait until the weather's a little better and you can sow outside. So one example of a plant that you can grow for a crop are dwarf French beans. Dwarf French beans grow to about 60 centimeters maximum. So that's about 2 foot, often not even that tall. So they're really useful for putting into containers. Other runner beans and taller French beans that you often see on a tripod are really too big for a container unless you have a really big raised bed or something like that. So dwarf French beans are so easy to grow that they're a fantastic crop to have, and they carry on producing beans. The more you harvest them, the more they'll grow. If you just leave them on, they'll just develop into the sort of beans you have to boil later on. So they're an excellent one. They have nice flowers, so it's decorative as well. You can get them in a range of colors. You can get green, you can get purple, and you can get white, yellow. The purple ones fade when you cook them, but they're quite fun to grow. Or you can get a mixture in a packet of seeds. They're not totally hardy in the most exposed or northern places. So with all our crops that we're going to talk about, you have to think about how sheltered are you. And so you may be in Aberdeen and be very sheltered, fantastic. But if you're not and you're very exposed, maybe not the greatest one. They're sown in pots on a window sill, and the seeds are fairly biggish. They're about 2 centimeters. So you can see them very easy to handle. You put them in a pot, you put in the compost, firm it down, perhaps using another pot on top, put 2 seeds in, and you think, why 2 seeds? It's because 1 seed might not germinate. So it will be a real shame if you put just 1 seed in each pot and it didn't germinate. If you have 2, you can take out the weakest of the 2. So you cover it up with about 1 inch of compost, water it lightly, put it in on a windowsill, not direct sunlight, because that dries out and kind of burns the plants. And once it's got going, you can put them out when the threat of frost is over, and put them in several into a large pot, a big circular pot, or if you have a long rectangular one, they can grow quite closely together, and the distancing will be told to you. They're about 6 inches apart. And they shouldn't need to be supported at all. But if you're worried and it's slightly windy, you can put any sort of shrubby cuttings that are sort of stick-like, and they'll cling onto those. But they're wonderful beans to grow, and very easy to grow too, and will carry on all summer. Another plant which is fantastic to grow are courgettes, but they are big. So you have to have 1 in a big pot. And they produce an abundance of, we call fruit. Each courgette is a fruit. So you may not want to grow lots unless you've got lots of people to give them to, a big kitchen or whatever. So I'm just warning you, don't produce, say, 10 and then find you're overwhelmed. You can grow them again in a pot because they're quite big. Again, put a couple of seeds in, 1 of which you'll take out when it germinates, if they both germinate. Cover it with a little compost. And you need, in this case, to make sure you seal them while they're growing and able to germinate. So if you put a poly bag, if you put it in a poly bag, you seal the poly bag at the top, or you seal it around the bottom, and that keeps in sort of the warmth as well. And that should take about 7 to 10 days to germinate. And then you can remove the covering, because the covering sometimes gets condensation and you don't want them to rot. You can put them out in the garden when they've got at least 3 good leaves, and the leaves are quite big. So it's very obvious. And if it's, say, the temperature, if it's, say, now, you can't be sure we're not going to have a very low temperature at night at some point. So I would pot it up to a slightly bigger pot, and then wait till, again, you're sure of the temperature being above frost at night. And you can put them outside in a large pot. They like feeding, so they like feeding regularly. And as with most vegetables, what you're trying to produce is good fruit growth, not good leaf growth. We're not going to use the courgette leaves. So we want to feed with something like tomato or seaweed feed or comfrey, which has potassium, and potassium is a good for encouraging fruit growth. So something like that. And if you look at our one of our demos, there is a thing about liquid feed, and you can see how to make it if you want. You will get with courgettes a male and a female flower, so it's quite confusing which is which. But if you look at the female, you can see the fruit growing behind. And if you're really adventurous, you can cook with the flowers too. So that's great, but it will go straight on into the autumn. The more you pick, the more you will get. If you leave courgettes to grow for any length of time, say you go away on holiday, or where your work is closed down, you will end up with a marrow, which might be fine, but might not be necessarily what you want. Courgettes have a bit more flavor, so they're a bit more interesting. So this idea, which is growing a pumpkin in a pot, we talked about at Trellis, because it's quite fun in the autumn to have your own pumpkin. So the way you can do it in a pot is to have the seeds of these smaller pumpkins rather than the larger ones. So I'll go back to this picture in a minute and just talk you through it. You know what the big pumpkins look like because you buy them in the autumn, but these ones are much smaller. They're called, one of the varieties called Baby Bear, which is a nice name. And again, you would have one plant in a big pot, say a 45 centimetre, which is what sort of 1 foot, 1'6", something like that, a big pot. You start them indoors again in a 7 centimetre pot, 1 seed per pot, or 2 if you're worried that the one isn't going to germinate. And you plant them 1.5 centimetres deep, which is about ½ an inch really. Grow then, and again, do the usual hardening off and planting outside. In this case, the compost needs to be really rich, so you can use your multi-purpose compost, but if you can mix in before you plant the plant out, either a bag of farmyard manure, which you can buy from any garden centre, so it has to be composted farmyard manure, not raw from a stables. Or you can add, if you've got garden compost, add it to it. So it sort of makes it as rich as possible. But it does need, pumpkins do need warm, very sheltered and a sunny spot. So if you're very exposed, maybe not for you, but if you can find yourself a nice warm corner, then that's going to be good. Protect from frost, of course. Now, you may have seen pumpkins growing in the field and they spread a long way. And even these small ones will spread 1.5 meters. But what we can do is, instead of letting them spread, is to encourage them to grow upwards. So with a big pot, you can make a tripod of 3 stout posts, or if you've got some pruning done, or you've got 3 very strong canes, put them together, tie them together as a tripod, and you can tie in the stems so that actually what's going to happen is your pumpkin is going to grow upwards and your small pumpkins are going to hang down. Now, if you feel once they're growing that they're getting a bit heavy, if you get netting bags, often fruit comes or onions come in netting bags, you can hold the fruit in the netting bag and tie it onto your stout posts, and that'll take the weight of them. You do need to feed them like mad because they grow. The fruit is wanting a lot of moisture, a lot of food. So feed them every 2 weeks. And again, tomato or seaweed or comfrey, best liquid feed you can do. You do have to limit their growths because they will grow on forever. So once you've got 3, 4 or 5 fruits starting, and you'll see how long they can get depending on your tripod, pinch out the top of the stems, and that'll allow just the ripening fruit to ripen and not produce any more growth. They do want sun to get a lovely orange colour, so as they go on and the summer progresses, pinch out any leaves that are shading them so that they can get as much sun as possible. And you really harvest once they're a good orange colour and before the first frosts. And then once they're picked, they can be stored somewhere dry, a shed or somewhere. So you can use them for decoration for Halloween or for the autumn or something fun like that. So it doesn't have to be always in containers, the standard fruits. Sorry, I'll go back to the pictures. You probably can't see it actually, but you'll be able to see it when this gets sent to you. There's a picture of canes and supports are there. And also on the left-hand side, a picture of a small pumpkin. That's what we're looking for, those small, attractive-looking pumpkins. But the nice thing that you can grow very easily are early potatoes. Seed potatoes you can buy in any garden centre, garden shop. We buy seed potatoes rather than using the potatoes that we've got in our kitchen because they are produced to be free of viruses. And this is the one problem that potatoes can get, is they can get viral rotting conditions. So what we want to do is we can buy, and I bought some recently to chit or to grow on, and it was £2.99 for a bag with about almost a dozen, I think 10 actually, potatoes in it, ready to grow on. So it wasn't too expensive at £2.99 because I'm going to then grow on a lot of potatoes. So you buy seed potatoes, and the best ones to grow in containers are what we call early varieties. There's 3 different sorts of potatoes: first earlies, second earlies, and main crop. The main crop tend to be the big ones, and they take a lot longer to grow. So if you want to grow them in containers, the early ones, the first or the second earlies, which take about 90 days from you getting them sprouting to you being able to harvest, is an easy thing. And also you can fit them into your containers too. And you start off indoors at this time of year, or even a month ago. So March, April, by what's called chitting, which means you put your potatoes into usually something like a paper egg or a cardboard egg box, as you can see in the picture, and those little sprouts will start. So you leave them somewhere light so that you get good sprouts on them. These sprouts mean that the potato stems underground are going to grow quicker. You can put them in without doing that, but it just means it won't perhaps grow, they won't grow the potatoes as quickly. So you have to choose a large pot, container, plastic box, doesn't matter what you use as long as it's got drainage. The other thing you can use is, if you've got old compost bags, I cut the top off my compost bags so that I've got still the whole bag to use for all sorts of things. And also any container you use has to be opaque. It can't let light in, because as you know, light makes potatoes green and you can't eat them if they're green. So anything that's solid, and even a sturdy shopping bag that you can get. You must make drainage holes because potatoes are prone to rot if they get wet. So put that in a sunny position. Put in about 4 inches, 10 centimeters of multi-purpose compost. Then you put your chitted potatoes into your container. Depending on the size, you probably only need between 3 and 5 potatoes in each container. You put them with as many sprouts at the top, but it actually doesn't matter because they will spread. And you cover them with another 4 inches, 10 centimeters of compost. Firm it down, water it well. And what will happen is the shoots will come up, and you'll begin to see, as you can see in the picture below, the beginnings of leaves on top of the compost. And what happens then is you cover it with another 4 inches of soil or multi-purpose compost, and you let it grow up again, and you keep doing it until you get to the top of your container. If you've used the old compost bag, you've rolled it down to the first level, and so you roll it up gradually, gradually, gradually. And what happens is that those stems grow sideways under the soil and produce more and more potatoes. So the more you cover it up, the more potatoes you get. You may have seen it out in a garden called Earthing Up, when they do the same thing, but they've got it outside in the ground. So you cover it up. The only thing that might happen if you're putting them out, and people are putting them out into gardens now in April, is that the leaves might get touched by frost if there is one. So you can cover it up again with hessian or something like that to prevent any frost if you think frost might be likely. So very easy. Feed it every couple of weeks, again with a liquid feed that we've talked about before, and make sure they don't dry out. They need to keep reasonably moist, not too wet. And you wait until you get the first flowers showing in July or August, and then your potatoes should be ready to go. And you can just literally upend your container into a barrow or into something and take your potatoes out. It doesn't matter if they stay in a bit longer, it just means they get bigger. So that's fine. Very easy and lovely flavour. Your own potatoes, what could be better? What else can we grow outside? Well, once the weather has improved and the threat of frost is over, we can actually just sow seeds outside. in containers. So some of the quickest growing crops, and that's what we really want, don't we, are radishes, which take 30 days from sowing the seed to harvesting. Carrots, which take a little longer. They're probably the longest. They take about 50 to 70 days, so they can take up to 2 months, depending on the size. Salad leaves very, very quick, 21 to 28 days. Spring onions, another thing we can grow very easily. Beetroot, sorry, I can't see the side of my screen, but Swiss chard is another lovely thing, and beetroot too. So there are many more things you can grow as well, but these are just some suggestions of easily grown quick crops, so we can see quite quickly what our harvest is, what we've grown outside. How do we do that outside in a container? Choose the right side of container in terms of what may be the root size that you're going to grow. So if you were growing, say, carrots in a container, then long carrots will need a greater depth. But there are small round carrots, or you can pick your carrots as baby carrots, which is quite fun to have and nice to eat. So carrots which you're growing to a fuller size will probably need about 30 centimeters or 1 foot depth in your container. But other smaller crops like radishes or beetroot, you can actually use a depth of 15 centimeters or 6 inches. So if you think of the depth of a window trough, a plastic window trough, that would be fine. That's plenty of space. So troughs can be used outside, which are wonderful. You can use them on window ledges or on the edge of paths. They sort of are smaller than, say, big round containers. But as long as everything's got drainage and you've got holes in it, you can really use anything. People grow in Wellington boots. People grow in watering cans. So you can, you can use as much as you like. I would suggest you don't grow things in very huge, deep containers, unless they're things like courgettes, and I've said should go in a big thing, because you're using up a lot of compost and it can be quite moist, whereas some of these quick growing crops don't really need to have that much soil underneath them. The way you sow outside, rather than just doing one in each pot, is you can sprinkle onto a round pot or a long pot seeds so that they're randomly sown. Sometimes if the seeds are very little, you need to mix them up with a bit of sand. And then you can, which is absolutely fine, the sand won't hurt them at all. And then it's easier for you or your members of your group to actually see what they're sowing. And you can actually see where it's gone onto the pot. So that's one way of dealing with small seeds. Another thing you can do if you're dealing with troughs and you want to grow in a straight line, say you want to put a straight line of carrots, is you can draw a line through the compost with a cane or a pencil, or to make it easier to see, you can actually put a thread, a piece of twine, something you can actually see, and it gives someone a line that they can sow along. Now, it's difficult always to get the spacing right, and spacing should be on the back of your packet. But what you can do is thin out. So there's a picture there with someone holding the seedlings that they pulled out, so that you can make enough space for what's left in the pot to actually grow and so on. And I'm sure, again, on the back of your packet, it should tell you what the spacing needs to be once you've thinned it out. The only thing I'd warn about is if you're growing carrots, when you pull out the little carrot seedlings, and that's really when you see those first leaves, you can see them on that picture, they create a smell of carrot, and this attracts carrot root fly, which lay their eggs onto the carrot itself and eat into it. So to prevent them from being attracted by you thinning out, if you lift up your pots to table height, strangely, the carrot root fly doesn't fly that high, it only flies at a low level. So that will keep it away. Or you can just cover it again with a piece of fleece, a piece of netting, something like that, which should just keep the root fly off until those plants get a bit bigger. So that'll stop them, and the smell has gone. So that's a good way of avoiding having problems. But really, the world's your oyster when you grow outside. There's many things, all the things I've suggested you grow indoors. If you haven't had time, you can still grow them outside. You can put courgettes in a pot outside once the threat of frost is gone. Now, what happens if you can't grow from seed? It's too complicated, you haven't got the right things, you've missed the time to do it. You can just buy modules from a garden centre. It's a bit more expensive, yes, but at least it gives you a chance to grow things. So if you think, I get a whole packet of courgettes, it's too many, you can just buy one plant from a garden centre and you can pot it on into a bigger pot outside and just enjoy the fact that you're growing vegetables and not worry too much about the fact that seed sowing, some people find too difficult to manage in a group or don't have the space as well. So there's plenty of plants that you can put outside and grow from modules and still enjoy the fun of growing something, producing some crops, counting how many courgettes you got that season or how many carrots you managed to grow. So I just want to encourage you all to grow vegetables in whatever way is possible. So if you've got any questions, this is the moment for questions.
Thanks, Caroline. Yeah, if everybody wants to put questions in the chat, or feel free to raise your hand if you want to voice your own. We do actually have a couple of comments and questions in the chat. So Margaret's saying that she likes the idea of growing the baby pumpkins. She thinks that's a good idea.
Yeah, that's nice.
Margaret's also saying comfrey feed for potatoes.
Yeah, anything, again, we're not encouraging leafy growth. So leafy growth you get from what's called nitrogen high feed. And if you make your own liquid feed, you can make it out of nettles. You can make it out of comfrey. Comfrey is a plant you can grow either in a pot or in your garden, and you mix it with water and let it sort of stew literally for a bit and strain it off. And comfrey is high in what we call potassium, so it's very useful for anything you're growing that doesn't require green leafy growth. And I did a live demo on composting, which is on the website, on the YouTube site. So if you look there, it gives you the details on how to produce these liquid feeds yourself if you can.
Great, thank you very much. And Margaret said as well that she hasn't had any success growing carrots in pots. She gets lots of foliage and tiny carrots. What's the best soil?
Well, usually multi-purpose is fine. I don't know what she's been using. Maybe feeding with a potassium-rich feed would be a good idea, because that encourages the fruit or the vegetable growth and not the leaf growth. They may be too close together. If they haven't been thinned out enough, you get smaller crop, which might be fine if you want, say, small radishes or small beetroot. But with carrots, they do need a bit of space. So it's a good idea to make sure that you've thinned them out properly. And she has used sandy soil. I've just seen that comment come up, because sandy soil is quite useful, actually, because it allows the carrots to do that. Try different varieties. Try the round ones. That's a whole new novelty. That might be fun to grow.
Great, thank you. Does anybody have any other questions? Feel free to raise your hand. I'll have a scroll, or even just, start voicing your question if you're raising your hand and I'm not spotted you. Or does anybody have Ruth, have you got a question?
I've heard about companion planting along with vegetables. Anything you recommend?
Usually a calendula, which is marigold, which is useful. It's a classic one that people have heard. The other thing is nasturtium.
yeah.
because they encourage, I mean, you don't want them to encourage, but they will attract black fly. So it's not that they give off a smell, it's more that what you're doing is allowing them to have the insects on them rather than on the crop that you're growing as well, too. Some people would say, sorry, I'm think through too. Sometimes alliums, any sort of onions or spring onions, things like that, because they're giving off a different smell. But that's fine in the ground. You could, I mean, because we're talking about pots at the moment, you could, of course, put pots of those plants around and about, you know, and mix them up. Yeah.
I've taken on lots of early pea plants. I've just somebody gave me a packet and they've all thrived. I'm going to do some pots, some plants for a plant sale in the next few weeks. So, and I'm always keen to get children gardening. So do you think if I put a few in a pot, you know, is that something that might be good?
That's a great idea. Exactly. I think peas and beans are fantastic things for people who are not experienced and find small seeds difficult to handle, especially maybe with children. Also, they're lovely. They produce lovely flowers. And people kind of understand peas and beans. They, you know what they're going to eat with them. So it's a great encouraging thing.
So just 3 sticks, a tripod type of setup in a pot. And just one or two plants in that pot?
I'd put a plant against each one of your legs of the tripod. So each one will go up that.
Yeah. Oh, well, I've got plenty. So
well, there you go then. You're away. You're away. The reason I was encouraging dwarf beans before is because you don't need to have a tripod, that you can just let them grow up and they're very easy. So that's another thing, maybe another time, but peas, lovely. Just keep picking them. Tell them to keep picking them because they will stop producing if you don't pick them.
Yeah.
But they are lovely.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ruth. Anybody got any more questions? Raise your hand or just... Oh, Graham, yes, sorry.
Sorry, I didn't quite get that.
A newsletter.
Oh, a newsletter. Well, Lorna will tell you.
Yeah, Graham, I saw your message there, so I'll get a newsletter sorted for you.
And there's lots of fact sheets too. So if you want to know more, there have been various different demonstrations done and fact sheets written. So there's masses of information out there, which is really helpful.
You'll receive a follow-up email with links to our YouTube channel where you can watch our previous live demos and do-along sessions, the activity sheet that relates to this session, and Caroline's presentation as well. So, because there's a lot of information in there, so it's good for you to have the presentation you can look back on.
Yeah, exactly. I'm sorry, a lot of it had to be written down. It's just so difficult to do in a live session as well. What I was going to say is the only thing I'd say is a bit difficult to grow in pots are cabbage plants because they require a long season of growing. I think what is most successful usually are plants that don't take very long to grow. So you're not having to worry about feeding them too long and so on. So things that are quick are useful, but you can grow spinach and chard. So, you know, there are some leafy vegetables you could grow as well.
Have we got any other questions, comments? I see that Helen has said that it was really useful, answered a lot of the questions for her. Margaret saying thanks, Caroline, very helpful. Vicky's asking, so we have a community garden and they do their own workshops. And And yeah, you can signpost anybody to our YouTube videos and fact sheets. I'll put the link in the chat for everybody just now as well, so that you don't have to wait for the email to come up and to come through. So let me just grab that. So this is the activity sheets and fact sheets there.
There's a question saying, is there anything you wouldn't try in pots? And I think, as I said before, cabbages, cauliflowers, broccoli, Brussels sprouts, things like that are more difficult. They need to be grown in the ground and really firmed in and have a very long period of growth. I think you can try anything, really. Experiment as much as you like. Because I will be proved wrong. Someone will grow the most wonderful cabbages, and there you go, that'll prove me wrong. But I think things that really need a very long time. I had thought also about garlic would be another good thing to grow in pots, because they don't need a lot of space. They do need a little period of cold, so you have to either plant them in the autumn or plant them early in the spring, so they get a period of cold and then they'll grow on. But things like especially spring onions are quite good too. So it's up to you. Give it a go.
And Vicki said that she's grown broccoli in large pots, very successful.
There you go. See, proved wrong.
And grown wild garlic in pots keeps it contained. And it's really good.
Yeah, of course, herbs. I haven't touched on herbs because that's a whole nother subject, and we will be doing another demo on that as well. But obviously herbs are fantastic in pots. A lot of them are Mediterranean. They like the well-drained soil that you can put in pots, and you can put them in a really sunny spot. So that's a fantastic thing. I haven't mentioned tomatoes either, because tomatoes can be difficult outside in Scottish environments. And there is, again, going to be another live demo on small cherry tomatoes. For me, the successful tomatoes I've managed to grow in Edinburgh were in the sunniest spot in my house, which is outside my front door. And I put small cherry tomatoes in pots with decorative plants. And last year, and they did extremely well. But otherwise, tomatoes, you need a glass house if you've got it, really, I think, from my experience anyway.